conflicted Aiden returns to Stone's Throw in Chapter 15 and visits Emma in her studio. In coming on the building, a stargazer lily is lying in his path. Impulsively, he picks up the flower, and this sets off an unsettling chain of events. Chapters 15 through 17 may be thought of as Icarus Transfigured's Scooby-Doo chapters, and their haunted adventure ends the first half of the novel.
The Blind Man, Part 1. Aiden was determined to take up Emma's invitation to visit her studio at Arbor Hall, even if the painter never entered into such understandings lightly. His problem with social parameters was an inability to distinguish between closed boundaries and boundaries that were either open or porous. For him, all boundaries were implicitly closed, despite evidence to the contrary. Except for scripted roles, where behavior and communication were well defined in impersonal terms, he experienced stress when he perceived himself as trespassing on others, even if the interruption was understandable. Where nonverbal cues were forthcoming in these critical exchanges, Aiden never presumed to interpret them positively or even recognize them in many instances. The more personal and nonverbal the interaction became, the more self-conscious and hyperlogical he became. He rushed into these deathly voids with diversionary measures to dilute their significance, if not invalidate them outright. Even though he comprehended what was expected of him in key moments, he lacked the social intuition to act. And when he did act, it might be more informed than kind, or done with awkwardness, or with a show of inappropriate emotion. Every encounter was a cerebral exercise of weighing guesses and calculating his replies, which required exorbitant mental energy. His character was, regrettably, immutable, so if any salvation from his social agonies was in the offing, it would come only through an acquired familiarity with the young woman. Saturday morning wore the undimmed colors of autumn. In his nervousness to see the photographer, the suitor opted to drive rather than walk the scenic route. After parking his car, he came upon a stargazer lily lying at the entrance of the graduate studios. He glanced at an open window and spotted more hothouse flowers in an azure vase, evidently intended for a painter's still life. With a half-formed notion, the lily was picked up and carried inside. Several unfinished art projects obstructed the primary corridor, which made for increasingly hesitant steps. Heavily cadenced voices approached from the other direction. One he recognized as Emma's. The artist slowed to consider his options. He dropped the stargazer before the graduate student,
And Seth Bowles appeared at the corner.
The preoccupied professor walked past his rival and trampled a flower. The photographer's expression seemed less unfriendly.
The visitor grabbed at words. I came by, like you said. Emma turned to lead the way. It was uncertain if she connected the cast-off flower to him. The graduate's darkroom studio was a little larger than a walk-in closet.
A sawed-off table and piece of foam board, suitable for pinning up pictures, took up half the space.
She yanked down several photographs drawing on a strung clothesline and laid them in front of her guest.
The feeling was one of wanting to get her made-in-haste meeting out of the way quickly. The painter looked over the pictures,
yet could hardly concentrate on them. Scattered, Emma picked up a toothbrush and started brushing her teeth at a basin. I must look a fright, he was bound to say. We can do this another time. Nonsense, she said. Despite her reply, her demeanor was different from the day before. Perhaps she was troubled by his abandoned attempt to profess undying love to her with a flower. As they stood shoulder to cold shoulder in the dim studio, the distracted teacher took in peripheral details of his pupil. Emma was not wearing makeup, and under a ratty brown sweater, her look strayed into mousiness. Women, to his thinking, were too malleable in appearance, and he was late to discover what they labored to conceal. Peculiar to him, up-close and personal moments introduced an element of unreality to his perception, where the other party was reduced to an odd collection of surfaces. He feared, where this analysis was undisguised, his eyes might betray knowledge of a shared charade. Seeking conversation, he observed, "You don't use a digital camera."
"No," she answered. "Analog is more like an extension of my body. Digital is more..."
"Superimposed?" he injected.
"Yes,"
she said, smiling. He understood her connection to her body, albeit intellectually. The photographer stroked her cardigan, apologizing for it, and then, with a divided mind, took it off and rehung it on a nail.
"Can I show you something?"
she asked, turning to the filing cabinet at her elbow. A coppery iridescent dress with fine gold thread stitching was pulled from a drawer. The gown was held over her long, sinuous body in a preview of coming attractions.
"The seam is out in the sleeve, so I got a good price,"
she bragged.
"I'm going to resew it, although I may not be able to get my bottom in it."
Aiden, who was mortified by the prospect of complimenting a woman for fear of being labeled a stalker, was provoked by her put-down of herself. "You must be talking about somebody else," he declared unwaveringly. No precise reference to her shapely derriere was made, but just the breathless thought of it squeezed the spontaneous remark from his lungs.
The young woman smiled again before returning the dress to the cabinet. She then closed her studio door, making the intimacy between them a third person in the small room. For all his shyness, the painter was serious in his stares of attraction, and only averted his gaze when the stare was returned. Generally, he was so self-conscious about eye contact that he timed his visual exchanges as to scientifically gauge an acceptable duration before looking away. It was like speaking English phonetically. He did not need to understand what he meant by it, only that the gesture convinced others he understood. A piece of paper was pulled out from under the stack of pictures. Aiden followed Emma's weightier expression down to see the poem he wrote for her lying on the table.
The photographer nonchalantly explained,
"I found this in my car yesterday. It must have fallen out of your book, unless you intended to leave it for me."
He was aghast. How had the torn page fallen out of his pocket? What, in fact, did he give Amber in Chicago? Between this and the lily in the hall, he was playing an unintentionally broad hand. He was caught on it either way. If he claimed he left the poem for her, she would know from his surprised look he was lying. If he said it was an accident, his words would portray him as a coward and not giving it to her outright. He hedged. It's not finished." Seeing easily through him, the photographer tacked the poem to her foam board.
"Then you won't mind me keeping the rough draft."
He would not embellish on what he wrote, so made a quick diversion of another picture in the pile. "Is this where we went after the party?"
"Yes."
Emma lifted the photograph.
"This is Nadir Mound, where they have the annual homecoming bonfire."
There was an unassuming pause to add,
"Would you like to see it in daylight this afternoon?"
Aiden need not express an opinion in the matter. The pecking order between them was established during their first outing to the mound. Emma threw open the door, allowing radiant sunlight to re-enter the room. Basking in it, she reached down in a space between the wall and filing cabinet to pull out a paper sack containing another dress.
"Would it be horrible if I asked you to wait here while I freshen up in the bathroom?"
Time in her company was the most elastic of things. The young woman was gone 20 minutes, and when she returned, she wore an electric blue taffeta dress, complete with sensible sneakers. Her vintage dresses never failed to lend an air of elegant formality to her every endeavor, though their shabby patina succeeded in leaving enough tarnish on the halo to keep her approachable. The graduate student blew by him on squeaky soles, done up in makeup and glowing. After returning the switched-out clothes to the studio, she snapped shut the padlock on the door and bounded ahead of him, like the youthful creature she could scarcely escape being. She stopped to pick up the wounded lily lying in her path.
"Thank you, Aiden,"
she sighed, clutching the crushed petals to her chest.
"for the critique."
With the little joke, she floated out the double doors. No arrows were needed to draw attention to what was transpiring between them. Such conspiracies require a measure of inattentiveness, even if ambiguity for shy Aiden often translated into denial. Re-emerging on the sidewalk, the visitor detected movement above him. The blue vase containing stargazers was still visible in the open window. The disturbance was likely a breeze stirring curtains. Nearing his car, he inquired, "What time is it?" Emma squinted.
"Late morning, I should imagine."
Aiden opened the door for his passenger, meekly pondering its handle. "Would you be interested in eating a late breakfast with me? Or an early lunch?" She was effervescent.
"Both."
The photographer was overdressed for the small Saturn, but it was a condition she was accustomed to given her own means of transportation. After a few minutes of driving, she placed the lily on the dashboard and picked up a slip of paper lying there. She neither smiled nor frowned, examining it.
"This looks like a woman's handwriting."
Aiden had forgotten about Amber's scribbled phone number, but was disarmingly quick. "I'm collecting samples of penmanship to edify myself." He paused in all seriousness. "You saw my penmanship in the poem, didn't you?" Emma tucked the paper scrap under the flower and dryly concluded,
"Then you'll be a winning success at writing numerals in cursive."
They were a mile past the electrical substation on the old country road when a pumpkin stand was spotted across from their intended destination. Seeing how the orange produce complemented her blue dress, an inspired Emma insisted they pull over to buy one. A farmer with a clouded eye tended the stand and was eager to make the most of his opportunity for conversation. "Where are you off to?" "Out to the mound," the shoppers informed him. The man gestured over the blowing cornfield. "That's where I saw the flying saucer." Their search for a jack-o'-lantern candidate was interrupted. The two shared a look. The sputtering farmer continued, "They abducted me, suspenders and all, big as day, right out of my truck. Took me inside the mothership and stripped me down to my best pair of fruit of the loom. They showed me a map of the universe. Looked like Jesus all done up in Christmas lights. That's when they turned the spigot on. Next thing I knowed, I was in the truck driving down the highway. Big as day, only it was night. When I got home, my wife was in bed. I got in and slept like a baby." Aiden handed the man money for the pumpkin, under the impression the story was over. The farmer, rummaging through an oatmeal tin for coins, savored finishing up. "My wife had been dead for 10 years by then, mister. 10 years. Emma was already toddling back to the car with their purchase in her arms. Aiden joined her. The farmer exclaimed in the background, "Someone should call the phone company and get to the bottom of it." With the pumpkin wrapped in an old blanket in his trunk, Aiden was slow noticing Emma's disengagement.
"Do you remember passing someone walking along the highway?"
Her friend followed her stare. A scarecrow of a figure stumbled down the gravel shoulder a half-mile back. "Let's eat," he replied. The two returned to the front of the car with more pressing business. The exterior of House of Cluck gave no hint to its dire interior. The smell of dank mop water assaulted the couple on entering, and the curtains were so thick with dust that little sunlight penetrated them. Aiden's disappointment was immediate, but Emma, not to be dimmed so easily, brightly ordered the pancake breakfast. Her companion rallied with an order of bacon and eggs. A display of neglected postcards sat on the counter next to the register. Its striped, sun-faded cards lined up perfectly with the slats in the window blind. A newspaper dispenser stood alongside the relic. Aiden scrutinized a week-old headline. Forgotten time capsule discovered at building site. Mayor plans opening. The pair was served their food on trays, cafeteria style, and set off in search of a clean table. Settling at last, Emma, now in full muse mode, took on a calculating charm while struggling to free syrup from a plastic pull-tab container.
You know, Aiden, she teased, you're more adventurous than you think in bringing me here.
Aiden held up his pathetically bent fork. There's more to college towns than ergonomically designed silverware, Miss Breton. Eating with me is like roughing it. The ailing utensil was thrust in his hot coffee and swished. This merited a glare. He justified his action. Part of roughing it is sterilizing your eating implements. Emma snickered, dropping a glob of syrup on her dress. She dabbed her napkin in ice water to wipe it away.
Better it goes on my dress than my hips,
was her brittle observation. The friend looked severely at her. Why do you say things like that? She smirked.
Because it's the only way to wrangle a compliment out of you.
Aiden, blushing, glanced around at their unfortunate surroundings. Hollowing festoons of orange and black construction paper hung from the ceiling. Yet these did little to lighten the pallor of the place. A jukebox was spotted in a corner, and desiring a different mood, the suitor fumbled for a few coins. He hastily inserted them before getting the lay of the machine. Nothing happened. Following another failed attempt with more coins, the troubadour returned to the table dismissively, wishing only to spare his chinked masculinity. It didn't have any Brahms or Schubert anyway, he reported. Emma leapt up and skipped to the jukebox without a syllable. She all but pirouetted before smashing a button. But Beautiful started up without delay. She twinkled back to the table, where her companion was obliged to complain. I'm no good with electrical devices. The photographer wielded her knife affectedly.
Are you one of those people whose VCR flashes 12 because you don't know how to program it?
That more accurately describes my busted bedroom clock.
Why don't you buy a new one?
He shrugged. I don't have the patience with programming things. The answering machine part of my phone hasn't been operational for years, but I can't see replacing it with some contraption with too many buttons.
You need a working phone.
The rest of my phone works fine.
When was the last time it rang?
In Chicago, a month ago.
You've had no calls since?
I think maybe I turned off the ringer so I could sleep.
Are you so cut off from the world?
It was sobering to hear it come from another mouth. He answered truthfully, I never intended to be. Emma smiled at the simple confession.
Meeting me is your first step to rejoining the human race.
Aiden, pleased by her assurance, let his unguarded gaze meander over the tabletop, up to where her slender finger grazed his knuckle.
I have an extra cell phone,
she announced demurely, before withdrawing her hand. She toyed with a cryptic smile and a pat of butter on her plate. Her veering into silence was like sound dropping out of a film in a crucial scene. It was comparable to instances in foreign films where subtitles, provided in white text, inconveniently overlay white tablecloths in romantic cafe settings. Whether Emma intended to finish her thought was supposition, for just then an ancient-looking, darkly attired man staggered through the front door. The couple did double takes. The fellow wore a sea captain's hat and coat. Both bore garlands of seaweed. His bony hands were stained purplish black, either from dye or blood pooling under his skin. His dingy white shirt exhibited stains around the collar and cuffs and suggested, in their decoration, a series of Rorschach tests. What was most curious, even spooky, was the word blind written boldly over his forehead. The letters were drawn in felt-tip marker and blurred from moisture. The decrepit seafarer ordered a cup of coffee and came to sit near the spectators. Not one to disappoint, he consumed his drink in a manner consistent with his unusual appearance. First, he raised the cup to his mouth 6 times without swallowing, turning to face the gawking pair with an automaton's blank stare each time. On the 7th pass, he slurped his beverage loudly, whereupon the routine repeated. This pantomime went on for 20 minutes and never varied, and when at last the man rose to leave, he smiled at his captive audience. It was more like looking past them, and further still past the drawn curtains. Once he was off the premises, an unhinged Emma pushed away her meal.
"That was him," she announced. "The straggler, on the road."
The two rose to leave minutes later, and on walking by the performer's table, Aiden spied a jumble of numbers, likely primes, jotted on a napkin. Outside, the day trippers found a strong wind had blown up in their absence. It racked a few cirrus clouds high in the blustery blue sky. Chivalrous Aiden circled to unlock the passenger car door and spotted the mechanical sea captain standing next to the highway. He was planted like a weather vane, yet turned in reaction to the couple's departure from the lot. The motorist glanced in his rearview mirror to see the fellow's ear-to-ear grin. To even disinterested onlookers, he might have resembled a corpse. Emma picked up on her companion's repulsion and dared a look. She quickly regretted it. Grabbing the dashboard, she yelped, "Drive faster!" Aiden was more intrigued than frightened. I doubt he intends to chase us. The caffeine didn't limber him up that much. Emma insisted.
"It must be a Halloween prank, don't you think?"
Aiden nodded in agreement, though wondered if his nightmares were braving daylight to pursue him. The Blind Man, Part 2. Several miles down the highway, the travelers turned onto a side road overlooking a hollow. A solitary horse grazed in a stable yard and suggested a topic of conversation. "Now that's what I'm scared of," confessed Aiden. The photographer snapped a picture of her subject against the rural backdrop, observing, "I think your biggest fear is women." Aiden snatched the prostitute's phone number from the dashboard and waved it about, refuting her assertion. Emma grinned, yet was struck by how humor gave her new friend rare license to be at ease with her. She gestured him down a gravel road. Harder wind winnowed high grass in the straightaway. Chaff pelted the car windows like buckshot. The travelers drove a solid mile before coming on the familiar cutaway that led to Nadir Mound. The photographer sheltered in the car to load a roll of film while Aiden adventured forward on foot. Occasional gusts hampered his ascent of the sloping hill. Mackerel clouds skated off to the east, Heavier, rain-swollen clouds loomed in the west. One cloud was uncommitted to either scheme. Mantled in radiant silver, its transcendence would not long survive the powerful trough of air. When the scout reached the summit, wild grasses lapped at its steep sides. A crosswind overlapped along the north approach and cut half-moons into contested territory. This turbulence of cross-purposes worked with intelligence, and with a mind to scare up a ghost or two. The spent remnants of the bonfire were as remembered, although the burnt effigy was missing. He scanned the horizon for it, and with the late thought that the ashes at his feet were strangely out of time. The bonfire could have been yesterday, or last year, or even 100 years ago. Something once said by an astronaut intruded on the moment. It was about being exposed to the vacuum of deep space for the first time in an airlock and how it smelled like an old fireplace. For all the wonders of the universe, this was the one detail that touched Aiden deeply. It was a sense memory of a personal event, an event that cut to the heart of the matter. The world was personal, and in no other way could it be quantified, qualified, or understood. He rose to his feet and wiped his hands. Emma now shot photographs lower on the southern slope. Her bright dress made her resemble a piece of manganese sky broken off and fallen to earth. Aiden hoped, regardless whatever dimension she truly inhabited, be it heaven or earth, she would emerge like a phoenix from the ashes, his ashes, to save him. The wind threw his head around. A whitish thing tumbled end over end across the meadow. Its queer movement had the character of striding legs counting off paces. The word homecoming briefly unfurled. Aiden marked the paper banner's progress until it snagged on something sticking out of the ground. He galloped down the hill and leapt into the high grass after it. Emma hesitated, thinking he was horsing around, but presently joined him. He had gained some height over her. "What did you find?" she asked. "Fallen trees." The topographer motioned from his perch. "They align in that direction." He jumped off the trunk to feel ruddy earth under his shoes. With probing steps, he walked first south and then east. Emma leaned into a fierce gust, blowing back her hair for a better view of his odd behavior. He eventually stopped, turned to where she stood, and spoke over the roar. "Are you up for a hike?"
How far?
"To those standing trees." The wooded area to which he referred was a good quarter-mile away. Her expression soured. The explorer made his case. "I think something big knocked over these trees and pushed in that direction."
Knocked over? Knocked over by what?
He was not disposed to ponder it. She relented and held out her hand. Aiden came back to take the offered fingers. The marrying of limbs and digits always made for awkward grips and a self-conscious stride. Such synchronicity was the gateway to any conceivable intimacy, even if he found little rhythm in it. It was no leisurely stroll. The terrain was a tangle, and the wind's ceaseless drubbing added resistance. Approaching their destination, their treading got easier just when the ground got harder and the grass shorter. More felled trees lay ahead, and a sudden embankment. A low growl bounded up the incline. Emma beckoned her companion down the crumbling declivity in pursuit of more substantive adventure. A rapid brook and abandoned quarry conspired to scenery, and as the late hour of the afternoon stretched eastward with long shadows, it felt like they entered a lunar crater. Aiden ignored the bluster of the water and concentrated on a placid patch of goldenrod above them on a limestone ridge. His tightening grip on his companion's hand nevertheless betrayed his apprehension.
"You afraid of water too?" she inquired.
He leaned into a retreat, and Emma, taking the hint, rejoined the path above. The couple came to a clearing. Slack-jaw Aiden recognized it. "I don't believe it," he exclaimed. "We're at the back of Willis Quadrangle. Behind that fence is my house. These ruts must be the remains of the old railroad track that the school pulled up." The front of Emma's taffeta dress was covered with grass seed. With uncharacteristic forwardness, her cicerone knelt to brush off the pleated fabric. Fingers were even licked to pick clean seeds stuck to the syrup stain. He felt foolish for putting her through so much bother. His attempt to smooth her feathers was entertaining. She glowed when he peered up from his servile attitude and announced,
"I guess this means you can introduce me to the crazy aunt."
It was strange seeing Emma at home in his house, despite there being little in the way of a woman's touch to welcome her. She gravitated to the kitchen and started going through cabinets. Boxes of sugary, sweet cereal dominated the pantry, as well as shrink-wrapped packages of ramen noodles. Catching Aiden's bewildered stare, she justified her intrusion by declaring,
"Not enough whole grains and vegetables."
The visitor eventually made her way into the living room, and with no less attention. Her expression hovered somewhere between amusement and bemusement while she assessed his negligible imprint on the house. Its asceticism was not that of a cloistered monk, but instead resembled the narrow indulgences of a schoolboy left to his own resources by vacationing parents.
"You need a plant,"
came her diagnosis. The bachelor shrugged. Emma strolled to the foot of the staircase and gazed up its 2 flights. Dimness crept down them to mirror the track of a cloud over the house. Aiden looked toward a window, dismayed. "It's going overcast."
"Well,"
she interrupted.
"aren't you going to show me your studio?"
The resident gathered courage and stepped around his guest to graze her skirt pleat. On reaching the attic, Emma returned the favor by gliding past him. The door nudged open with a creak, and the change of mood could not have been more dramatic. Aiden's paintings took on a macabre glow under the graying skylight. The visitor was bowled over by the wealth of detail before her, and was both excited and perplexed. She stared at one outlandish monster for several seconds, and then at the reserved, conservatively dressed artist. Highlighting the disconnection, she confessed,
"I would never have guessed you painted like this."
Aiden made his customary apology. "You don't find them disturbing?"
"They're that, too."
She was quick to add,
"But not all paintings have to be pretty in the usual sense."
Examining one work closely, she played psychologist.
"It's interesting horses frighten you when you choose to paint monsters."
Aiden grinned. "Just because I'm terrified of horses doesn't mean I don't admire their beauty."
"I've never thought of beauty as something scary,"
she pondered. He made a diversion of his CD player. "Would you like to hear something beautiful that isn't scary?" Emma smiled to see his boyish glee. Mournful piano music filled the studio. "This is Schubert's unfinished piano sonata in F sharp minor," he explained. "One movement, as the composer left it."
"Unfinished?"
Emma said slyly.
"Like your poem."
He was already absorbed in the music. She took the interlude to study the half-unpacked boxes. Many contained books. Not all the books were about art, though most could be related to the paintings in some way. The subjects included anatomy, botany, birds, medical illustration, typefaces, and circus memorabilia. There were also atlases and anthologies, as well as various reference books. Aiden was content to let her rummage through his things. seeing her actions choreographed to the music. Boxes not containing books contained hundreds of CDs, alphabetized by composer from Albinoni to Zemlinsky. Plastic organizers filled with tchotchkes and other curiosities were among the few things unpacked. Collections were sorted by tray or Ziploc bag and included rocks, fossils, seashells, broken glass, rock salt, plastic army men, plastic insects and fish, rubber monsters, brightly colored beads and trinkets, used-up markers and pens, old toothbrushes, old candy, game pieces, minus their games, and random doll heads and toy fragments rescued from out of doors. Dozens of spiral-bound notebooks were less organized, and doubtless due to overflowing pages of frantic writing that were not easily sorted. To the visitor's mind, it all weirdly fit. The art and artifacts were part of an artist studio that rightly belonged to this room. Yet beyond the bedroom and kitchen downstairs, the remainder of the bare-walled house served no purpose. The tenant assumed ownership of the property and its furnishings upon moving in, much in the way a chameleon assumes the character of a backdrop. It was perhaps truer to say he was a squatter here, one wary of being found out. At the abrupt but poignant end of the piano piece, she commented, "Beautiful." Aiden smiled to share one source of inspiration with another. Schubert is to music what Vermeer is to painting. There is light and shadow in his sonatas, but no real destination. He leaves you very much where he finds you, only deeper in the landscape. Emma puzzled aloud. "Why don't you hang your paintings downstairs?" He reflected on it briefly. "I feel exposed by their extravagance." "No one would think you vain." He offered no defense of his view. One of the painter's cardigans lay across a chair. The photographer put it on without calculation. It was the frank, artless act of a young woman where, in laying siege to an article of clothing, her biochemistry took possession of a scent. Loath to read too much into it, Aiden distracted himself from the evolving dance steps by staying close to a CD player when another sonata commenced. Emma knelt to look into one box away from the others. It was crammed with see-through folders containing clipped magazine and catalog pictures of attractive women. "Do you ever need a model?" she asked innocently. He looked up, feeling the ballet floor tip under his feet. Emma turned to face him. "I would be happy to model for free if you fix me dinner sometime." The painter's attempt to string together a response was painful to watch. Turning off his CD player, the darkening skylight spared him. "We'll have to run to beat the rain back to the car." She also stared at the threatening weather. "Or we can just wait it out." His eyes remained fixed on the window. Emma moved away from the last box, putting distance between herself and her offer. The host started rocking unconsciously in place. His level of unease distressed his guest. Her next question cut to the heart of everything he had allowed her to see. "Is there a destination to you, Aiden?" Lightning seared the window pane overhead. The startled painter, seizing on the drama, dashed to the studio door and looked down the stairs. Leaves scampered across the living room floor. He rushed down ahead of his companion to find the back door blown open. A black-knuckled thundercloud bore down on the courtyard, tearing at its blanket of compacted leaves like sentient skin. Stepping on the stoop, he exclaimed on seeing Emma catch up. "Quickly!" The couple ran from the house back the way they came. Occasional lightning strikes added incentive to speed their return to the car, but they were winded from their earlier jaunt and the 2 flights of stairs. The landscape turned to nightscape more swiftly than either would have thought possible, and by the time they reached the mound, both were practically crawling to its summit with bursting lungs. Emma seized her companion's arm at the top, slowing to smell the rain that was about to overtake them. The shrinking sky ahead had turned a shade of periwinkle, and low-slung sulfur clouds, butterscotch in color, formed a calamitous furnace-work along the western horizon. Aiden tracked the remaining stitch of light to see a rangy figure staggering towards his car below.
"He followed us,"
cried Emma. The dark sea captain, with a face of gleaming death, cut a stark profile against the pale, turbulent grass. It was going to be a whisker-thin finish to beat him to the vehicle. Aiden pulled Emma down the slope like a force of nature, and with the wind and momentum at their backs, they were running as fast as they could together on hitting the bottom of the hill. The car, however, cut off their view of the man. Both got in on the driver's side, Aiden in the front and Emma in the back. Large splattering raindrops began striking the windshield in a preamble of what was to come. She was breathless.
"Where is he?"
The driver reached over to lock the passenger door, just when the watery avalanche crashed down. Yet he too saw nothing of the ghoul. He shifted the car in reverse, though was unable to comprehend what lay in front of him. The cadaver captain rose in the high beams, blurring like ink under the wiper blades. He planted a bony hand on the car hood. Emma screamed. Aiden punched the accelerator and flew back to hit the other side of the lot. By the time brakes were applied, the car overshot the perimeter to land in the thicket. He shoved the stick shift in drive, but the rear wheels spun unproductively in loose earth. The lumbering zombie presented a kaleidoscope image over the wet windshield. It was impossible to lock him in place. Emma was about to cry again when the car tore away from the dampened ground. The driver steered wide in hopes of not hitting the fellow, but the captain was abruptly on the passenger side like a too-close mailbox. There was a glancing blow. Emma yelped to see him roll off her door. Aiden skidded several yards before his tires anchored. Nothing was seen through the fogging rear glass. "Are you all right?" he asked. She trembled. He threw open the door and pushed against the deluge. A squint turned up only the impaled remains of the bonfire effigy, sideswiped on a wooden pole. He ducked into the car to assuage her fear. It was only the effigy. Emma was coherent.
"Let's go, Aiden."
Without argument, he sped down the byway. The squall matched the coarseness of the gravel, but soon relief came with the lavender mist of asphalt pavement. The passenger remained quiet in the back seat, having shrunk under his cardigan to become another shadow of a hurried nightfall. Her voice was low in the din.
"The lily's gone."
Aiden kept his eyes on the tremulous white line ahead, but confirmed her observation with a glance at the dripping dashboard.